Welcome to the National Resource Center for Diligent Recruitment at Adopt U.S. Kids peer-to-peer meeting on recruiting, developing, and supporting resource families in rural communities. I'm Tracy Surjanian, Associate Director at NRCDR. The purpose of the meeting today is to provide you with the opportunity to connect with your peers, ask each other questions, and share information about strategies, resources, successes, challenges, and lessons learned for recruiting, developing, and supporting resource families in rural communities. Our facilitators for today's meeting will be Becky Main, Tribal Child Welfare Specialist with NRCDR, and Kathleen Bellinger, Consultant with NRCDR, who is an expert specializing in rural child welfare. Kathleen and Becky have a great deal of experience working with diverse rural and tribal child welfare systems and communities. They're going to present some information about resources and relationships in rural communities and approaches and strategies for recruiting, developing, and supporting foster, kinship, and adoptive families in rural communities. There are many different definitions of rural. Most people frequently refer to rural as non-metropolitan. Most of the land in the U.S. is rural, and we recognize that each rural and tribal community is unique. So please take the information that is shared and consider what will work in your community, or what won't work, of course, or how it could be adapted to work well. We want to have a meeting specifically about rural diligent recruitment because we recognize that the challenges and strengths of rural communities are not the same as in metropolitan areas. And of course, this must be considered when recruiting, developing, and supporting rural resource families because the needs and strategies and approaches that will work are going to be different. There's a lot more to cover than we can discuss in our meeting today, which is an hour and a half. So at the close of the meeting, we're going to talk briefly about some additional ways that the NRCDR can support your work and how we can continue this conversation after today. So before we get started, we just want to go over a few housekeeping items. So the meeting is being recorded, and it's going to be shared publicly on the NRCDR website, and we want you to know that so you can be aware of it during the discussion. After the meeting, we'll provide you with a link to the recording, a copy of the PowerPoint. So if we're not able to cover everything, you will get a copy of it, and a contact list in a follow-up email. So the contact list will include only those people who indicated during the registration process that it would be okay to share your contact information. So if you didn't say that was okay, your information won't be included. We're providing the contact list to you so that you can reach out to your peers, for instance, if you have follow-up questions about something they share during today's meeting. Your phone line is not open now, but it's going to be open during the rest of the meeting from now on. And we have a lot of people on today's call. We actually have 85 people registered for the call. So please mute your line when you're not speaking to prevent background noise. We want your lines to be open because we want it to be an interactive meeting where you can exchange information and ideas and you can ask each other questions. And your peers won't be able to see your questions or comments in the chat. So please, we encourage you to speak up on the phone and share your ideas with the group. Or if you enter questions or comments in the chat, we will try to read them aloud or ask you if you want to share them with the group. And we'll get to as many as we have time to address. So when you do have a comment or question, if you could start off by sharing your name and state, tribe, or territory when you speak up, that will help us get a sense of who else is on the call and get to know each other a little bit. So Marche, if you could go ahead and open up all the lines right now, I think that will work well. And folks on the call, if you can mute your line, that would be great. So I'm just going to quickly review our agenda for today. So we're going to do the welcome, introductions, and housekeeping, review of agenda now, and then we're going to get into talking about rural and tribal challenges and strengths. And then we're going to talk about strategies for recruiting resource families in rural and tribal communities, and strategies for developing and supporting resource families in rural and tribal communities. And then we'll take a few minutes at the end to just go over some resources and next steps and closing remarks. Marche, are the lines open now?
Renee or not, would you like for me to open the lines at this time?
Yes, please do. Thank you. So as I mentioned, we have 85 people registered for the call, so we won't be able to go through full introductions of everyone.
Again, you really need to speak with somebody that does taxes. Yeah, I would love to help, but I truly don't.
Could we mute that line, please?
Okay.
Thank you. So we can't go through the full introductions of everyone, but we do want to start off just hearing from some of the folks who've joined the meeting. So we're going to begin just by discussing some of the challenges and strengths of rural communities. So if we could start off and just a few people on the call, just introduce yourself, tell us where you live, what's the community like, if you're having challenges with recruiting, maybe what some of the challenges are, if there are particular communities you're concerned about. We'd love to hear from the group. So does anyone want to go ahead and start us off?
I will.
Thank you.
My name is Lori Nichols, and I'm located in Nevada. I am a foster care recruiter for the rural region of Nevada, which is basically 15 counties outside of Clark County where Las Vegas is, and Washoe County where Reno is. So they have their own recruiting and licensing units, and I cover the rest. I joined the call because this is so geared toward my role in this agency, and certainly once I think I've exhausted all of these different ideas and different things that we're trying, and it's always very refreshing to come to these meetings and hear about what other people are doing, and so I greatly appreciate other comments and ideas that I can bring to my region. Am I supposed to say a challenge or a strength?
If you'd like to, we'd love to hear it, but no pressure, of course.
Okay. I think definitely a challenge would be that we are so stretched out over how many hundreds of square miles that we have a lot of what I call pocket communities that are very small communities that are stretched out. And of course, with having such a big state and a lot of expanse between the towns and between the counties, it's very difficult to get your foot in the door, so to speak, with these, with the partnership and working with, partners out in those areas, like community partners or collaborators. So that's one of the biggest challenges for me. It's a challenge that I really enjoy taking on because I've really seen the positive things from that. So that's what I have to share at this point.
Thank you so much, Lori. Does anyone else want to share? We've got a few more.
I'm Dana Gary. I just joined the call. I had problems with my computer, so I'm calling from Helena, Montana.
Thanks, Dana.
Yeah.
Do you want to share a little bit about why you joined the call, maybe a challenge or strength that you experience in your community?
Well, I work in Helena, Montana, and I do I'm a family resource specialist in our Child Family Services Division. Been here a couple months, and I license foster care and kinship families. There's 4 counties that the two of us cover, and I help one of the larger counties with my coworker, Jesse. And I used to work for Department of Justice when I did the Drug Endangered Children Coordinator before I was laid off. And I would get flyers for the rural physicians when their conference was. And so I had a doctor present about drug endangered children up in Great Falls when the rural physicians, there was about 55 of them that showed up for this conference and gave out information. So it's kind of a good way to find out who are the rural physicians in these areas for services for folks that need these services for kids that are placed out of home in their care. So I was on the call to figure out how other places do it. I know Montana is probably the most rural state as far as this category, but just trying to see what other folks are doing to try to help. I know support groups help with foster parents, but just trying to figure out, brainstorm ideas for transportation for folks to get to these places when they have to drive quite a distance because it's so rural. That's about what I was thinking.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dana. Let's hear from two more people, let's say.
Hey, this is Lacole White. I'm calling from Arkansas.
Hi, Lacole.
Hey, my role is I'm the Foster and Adoptive Resource Family Recruitment, Retention, and Volunteer Services Program Manager, and that is also known as Arkansas Creating Connections for Children. What I would say one of our strengths are is that we have a lot of people that are excited, or maybe not so much excited, but they're interested in helping us tackle our foster care crisis with placement. But one of our challenges is that some people are working in isolation and not working together. And so I'm here to hear from the other states on what that resource development is and collaboration.
Excellent. Thank you. Let's hear from one more.
Hi, I'm Jessica Hartwig with the Adoption Exchange in Nevada.
Hi, Jessica.
Hi, I'm on the line too because I work with the Adoption Exchange as an adoption recruitment specialist for the state. And just like Lori Nichols said, and she and I have worked together a little bit virtually, it's difficult with such a large state and so many small towns hundreds of miles away from each other. And so I'm here to just learn more about the recruitment support that's for families in the rural communities.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for sharing. It's really helpful to hear from you. And we're going to do a couple of poll questions in a moment to get a sense of the larger group's experiences and with rural challenges and strengths, because we want everyone participating in this dialogue. So I'm going to now hand it off to Kathleen to move to the first poll question.
Great. So here is our first. We thought we would start this off by asking you all, why do you live in your rural community? Now we know not everybody who's on this call actually lives in a rural area, but if you don't, think about the rural communities that you're trying to serve. So why do you or would you live in your rural community? So go ahead and click off all the ones that you think are appropriate. We're just going to take this little poll. So do you live there because of the people, knowing and working with your neighbors? It's where I'm from. It's where my family's from. I love the outdoors. It's a great link to nature, quieter, less complicated. I love the place, it's home, or some other reasons. So just take a second and click all the ones you want. And Rubette, when you think they're in, you can show the responses. Okay, I'll look at that. The quieter, less complicated. This is the first time we've done this poll. I love it. So the quieter, less complicated, almost everybody, or 3/4 of the people, like living there because of that. And then love the outdoors, link with nature, the people and home. And then where I'm from, it's where my family's from. It's interesting that more than 1/3 of you, it's where you're from. That's a real interesting. So as you can see, there are lots of pluses for living in a rural community. So put that in the back of your mind as we move to the next slide. You all have already mentioned several of the rural and tribal challenges in rural communities. And some of these you mentioned in your questions when you signed up for the call, and others have mentioned them right now. But the first is we just don't have as much money as urban communities do. They're poor people, working poor, child poverty is higher in rural communities. Human capital, I know you all know this, I'm preaching to the choir, but there are fewer specialists, there are fewer doctors, mental health, behavioral health providers, pediatricians, psychiatrists. Physical capital, there is limited transportation, as you well know and have already mentioned. The roads can sometimes be poor and blocked by weather. Buildings, hospitals, we've had more rural hospital closures, 51 rural hospital closures since 2010, and 283 hospitals are right now in rural hospitals are in danger of being closed. Schools, internet access, that's a biggie. And distance to travel. You've already said this, but for training and development opportunities, for the resource parents and caseworkers to take the children to see their families, to access services, specialists, for child visits, for consultation, collaboration, and respite care. So there are a ton of rural challenges. And we probably should also mention that all that distance to travel involves both time. You know, you spend so much time on the road. What do you do? And then also funds. You know, gas and all kinds of other challenges. So that's our next poll question. What challenges does your community, your rural community, face? So take a minute and check off all the ones that apply to you. And Rubette, when you think we've got most of the answers in, feel free to show it. Okay, so the speediest 31 people who've responded, this is what we've got: distance to travel. Now, that is always a biggie. And I don't know if you've noticed, but sometimes people in the urban areas they don't think about that when they're scheduling things. But it's 87% know that the distances are really a challenge. And then economic challenges are right up there, 74%, three-fourths. Then human capital limitations. We don't have the people we need to do the jobs. And sometimes we have to choose with somebody with a degree and then somebody who we think might otherwise be competent, but we need that degree or that human capital. And then physical capital limitations. That's a huge one. I'd just like to take a minute. There are 25% of you who think there are other challenges. Could you name a couple of them for me? Those of you who clicked other, just name a couple.
Hi, this is Lori Nichols. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want to go?
No, you can go ahead.
Okay. You know, thinking about other challenges, this is Lori Nichols in Nevada. I think other challenges, something that I haven't really heard brought up in the past is just the relationship of, or the reputation of the agency in our rural communities isn't always a good one. And so it's very difficult to engage these smaller communities because they have, you know, they don't trust the agency. So that's one of the things that I've found that can be problematic.
Good point. Who else had one?
Crystal Graves from Minnesota. I was just going to add that I think that we focused kind of more on the human capital limitations as being professionals, but there's also the support of immediate family and others as they take these placements.
Oh yeah, that's who's there to support them? Is that?
That's basically, yeah. Who's going to be their support system, their support net as this goes forward?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Okay, others?
It looks like Anthony Paris had shared issues with their community response to family fostering or providing kinship care for a child of another culture or race.
Oh, yeah, good point. In the chat, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This is Anthony Paris.
Uh-huh.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I probably should have just, what I was trying to say was I think it would be the same, whether it's a foster family, a kinship placement, or a foster and adoptive family, they probably face the same issues, I should say, in that not only their own family might say, well, why are you doing this? Why are you fostering? Why are you taking this child in? But if they're specifically, if there's if they're a foster family in a rural community, I could see where maybe there would be issues with people giving them stares. If it's, let's say, it's a Caucasian family caring for a Hispanic or African American child, those issues would be the same for those folks as they would be in any community. So maybe that's not unique to a rural area.
Well, I think you raise a good point, though, Anthony, because you're talking about it's more visible because people know each other, so there may be more of a stigma, and the difference is noticeable to them in a rural area. I think that makes sense. Any others before we move to the next slide? Obviously, these few things are not an exhausting list, and the challenge is because we're small. I mean, the challenges of scale, we don't have enough people to sometimes justify a hospital or justify a professional or justify a whole set of support services that normally you could find in an urban area. So those are the challenges, along with stigma and other parts that come from having a smaller number of people in a larger distance. So I just want to review also some of the strengths, because sometimes we think we are working so hard, we may not recognize the real strengths that we have in rural and tribal communities. The first one, and obviously there are many more strengths than this, but the two that stand out are the place. I know more than a third of you said you actually are from that area, so the place itself gives a context for life, a history, some continuity over generations, and the potential voting power. There are several articles that say that wherever the rural community goes, that's who's going to elect the president. And that's an interesting thought because people care and they get out and vote. They're manageable systems. So because you have a smaller place, it's much more manageable. We know each other. We can move around. We tend to know where we're going and can figure out creative ways to solve some of the problems. And values is a huge thing. Loyalty, family, initiative, self-sufficiency. And that leads to the other thing that we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about, and that's social capital and relationships. And basically when we're talking about social capital, the other slide talked about a lot of other kinds of capital. Money is capital, human capital, people, physical capital, all that. But there's another kind of capital, and that's called social capital, and that's the value of our relationships and memberships in social networks, people you trust, shared norms, values. And all that is kind of transferable. And I'm going to take a little bit of time here and give you one of my favorite examples. I forget what year it was, but I think it was 1967. There was a young Vista worker. He was 27 years old, and he really wanted to help save the world. And so he went to a place called Emmons, West Virginia. And Emmons, West Virginia, was a very small, poor coal mining town. And he didn't know anybody in Emmons, and nobody really was going to talk to him, this, city guy from who knows where. And here he shows up in their town. So he sat by the railroad tracks and he just started talking with the kids and throwing rocks. And he kept doing this for like 6 months. And one day, one of the kids invited him home to his house for dinner. And then some more kids invited him over for dinner, and pretty soon, after people started seeing who he was and what he cared about and that he really cared about them, he became part of their community. And the young fellow's name, you may have heard before, his name was J. Rockefeller, and he was one of the wealthiest people in the whole United States. He inherited his wealth, but he was absolutely broke, had no social capital in Emmons, West Virginia, until he started making those relationships slowly, and the people came to accept him, and he was able to do several things, and he was eventually elected senator from West Virginia and only retired after serving West Virginia for 50 years last year. actually December of 2014. So that's an example of social capital. He had no social capital. So Becky, you want to ask this question? And
All right. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you, Becky.
When you're thinking about the example that Kathleen just shared with you, think about your community and who do you know that's rich in social capital? I think one of the things to also think through is who would you go to if you needed help?
Well,
Becky, do you want some folks to speak up? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, this is Justine from Helena, Montana. I think for a lot of our areas, the schools is a huge resource for them as far as maybe a contact on who would best help them if there's something that came up. And I know with a lot of our areas, a lot of times people will just seek out their volunteer firefighters to see if they know people who would be able to assist or help and just kind of get the information from them. So it just kind of depends because there's some that are so rural that there's only like 10 people in that area, and then there's other ones that have like a couple hundred, so it just kind of depends. But usually they know in the community who is the one they can go to get assistance.
So who in the community, can you think of some people in other communities who you might, they may not even have a role, or they might be just a person, or it might be just somebody everybody knows, like Mrs. So-and-so, or it could be the judge, or it could be, do you all have examples of that?
This is Lori Nichols in Nevada. I know that for two different areas in Nevada that we are very engaged in, the collaborating partner is like court personnel that really have a stake in seeing more foster homes come to those areas. I know here in Carson City as well as in Winnemucca, in those areas, we have judges that are very active with seeing more foster parents come to the forefront. So for us in our community, a lot of times it's the judge, it's the different court personnel, it's the court-appointed special advocates, the CASAs. Here in Carson, we have a CASA director that is just passionate about seeing more foster homes come to Carson City. So that is, and then I have another judge out in another area in Tonopah that is also equally as involved. So to me, at least for our areas, that's who I see as having a lot of social capital.
Is there anybody else?
This is Kim from Idaho, and one of the things that we have seen in pockets of our ruralness is churches. If there's a particular, like one I can think of in particular was a Catholic church, and most of those the folks that lived around there went to that church, and once we got the priest kind of, when he got really excited about things, and then that was maybe they didn't have as much as a role in actual foster care, but supported lots of, here's who you should connect to, or we'll bring the meeting here at the church, they'll come here, that sort of thing.
All right, thank you. If we can move to the slide, we'll go ahead and start right in and take it a little bit further, talking more about the types of social capital. We can talk about bridging and bonding capital. Bridging, referring to people who link well to other groups or organizations. We all know people who seem to be friends with everyone and that everyone seems to trust. If we go to a city or a tribal council, a church, or even a neighborhood, who would be the person in the know? The person that those people trust, those are the bridgers. Bonding refers to people with really great bonds within their group and who have those strong relationships, and perhaps someone people can trust inside an organization. So let's take a all meant to reflect. We can all think of people in our own organizations that everyone trusts. Who would you go to if you needed to be able to trust them? Do you consider yourself a bridger or a bonder or both? Who can we bridge with? Who do you bond with? You don't need to answer out loud, just think about it. It's important to understand that there are two kinds of social capital. Bonding capital is a strong relationships that are held within groups. For example, a high school clique has bonding capital. The relationships are strong within the group and, in fact, may keep people out of it. Some groups even exclude people. If you think about some churches and faith groups, some may be very good to people in the group but not have as good of relationships with people outside the group. Bridging capital, on the other hand, is the ability to link different groups. Other groups have outreach programs and bridge with all kinds of members, kind of like somebody just shared about the judges and how they're able to really connect with the community. If you're well respected in your child welfare organization or a volunteer for your child's school and a president of the PTA, you may be able to bridge both of those organizations. Next one, please. Kathleen?
Yep, I'm on. So we're talking about social capital, and we know we don't have money to solve the problems, and we know we've got a wealth of relationships if we can just tap into them. And so what we'd like to do is for the group right here to share ways they have found to use social capital. And for example, look at the second point, ways to recruit. Most of you out there have impossible jobs. You are supposed to do so much with just your own amount of time. But you can be a lot more efficient if other people are recruiting for you. So if you can think of ways that you might have used social capital to get other people to join in this whole recruiting effort. So let's hear from you all. I know you're brilliant and you've had a lot of successes. I know some of you on the call, and I know how wonderfully you've succeeded in some of this. So give some examples about some concrete recruitment strategies that you've been efficient by using social capital.
This is Lori Nichols in Nevada. So over the last 4.5, 5 years I've had this job, really what it has become clear to me is that we absolutely have to have positive relationships with each rural community, and that's really difficult to have. What I have found, as I mentioned before, though, is having the social capital of judges and people that work within different, not necessarily the child welfare agency, but agencies that have to do in some way with, the welfare of children. Things like Boys and Girls Club and, different agencies that do work with kids and have that influence. Once you get your foot in the door with those folks out in these communities, they are, that's the one thing about having small communities that you work with. I mean, there are negatives to it, but there's also some really positive things, as you guys stated, like, most places, if you make a connection with somebody, or most agencies out in these rural areas, they will bend over backwards for you to help you put up flyers about an event that you're going to have in the coming, week or whatnot. Currently I have an orientation or like an open house information hour that's going to be scheduled in Ely. And so all I had to do was contact the school districts there, and the school district is more than happy to put, flyers in the kids' homework folder, so that really the cost, I think, of those flyers was right around $260. And basically, they reached Ely's a very small area too, but I think it's about 1,000 families that those that those flyers went out to, I mean, that's huge to reach all those people. And every single one of those parents in that county school district is going to get that announcement about the orientation that we have coming up. So definitely it's good to have those good relationships. And, you know, I think when you're nurturing those relationships, I think that really is a huge key to having more success with your recruitment out in the rurals.
Thanks, Lori. That is a really great example, because that shows, you know, not just it's not just a strategy, but being in a limited budget, you didn't have to go out there to do this. They did it. They actually helped defray some of the costs, it sounds like. What about some others? Are there ways that you could build a connection and use a connection to recruit and to work in your limited budget?
This is Lori White, and I'm in Longview, Texas, rural part of Texas. And one of the things that has been most effective for us has been using our faith-based organizations. The families that we have successfully recruited bring in the other families, people in their communities, see their foster experience, their adoption experience, and the support networks that they have, and they build in the community, brings other families in, and so we've had more success most recently just with churches and some of our faith-based child placing agencies recruiting in that avenue. It's a lot easier if you go in to do a recruitment activity in a church or a faith-based organization where they know someone that has had that experience or is experiencing that, rather than going in cold turkey to a church that has no experience with fostering or adoption. You don't get quite the response. Whereas when you go in and someone says, "Oh, I know that family," and they talk about their experience, we had much more success using those connections in the community.
Did you always do it that way, Lori, or what changed?
Well, I think we have always tried, but what we've noticed is that in the churches or in the communities where there are families that are currently fostering or have fostered, or families have seen that they know someone who's had that experience, it's just been far more successful for us. And of course, we have several large churches in our area that have started their own initiatives. Hope for 100, trying to get 100 children adopted or foster care homes for them, or in the area where they have their own initiative to step out and help in the community, and that's not always been the case.
Yeah. So you found who actually the churches who they listened to, and those are the people who went into your church, and the ones who have their families, they were like bridgers,
Yes.
to y'all, and so it sounds like it's really effective in that area. So I need to turn it over. I could go forever, but well, next slide is for Becky.
All right. Thank you. And just to keep things moving along, we just started talking about strategies for recruiting, developing, and supporting rural and tribal resources. So, some of the comments that, we've heard so far is, being able to know your community, engaging the community, utilizing strengths, and kind of what, we've been talking about, who's rich in your social capital and tapping into that resource. And I think one of the things that we need to really focus on too is, recognizing tribes and how each is their own sovereign nation and are unique in that respect. And it's, become aware of each other's worldview, so really valuing and respecting each other's cultures, taking the time to develop, understand, communicate, and recognize, one another and the cultures that we're coming from. And, just looking at these strategies, we may be able to say, yeah, but we know this already. let's take this a little further by saying that, if we're aware of our social capital and relationships, we can expand upon our bridging and bonding capital through the lens of our respective work and those of our children and our resource families. If we know our communities and the resources that are available, we could also strengthen our knowledge, but most importantly, establish collaborative relationships with the tribe in, your area, or vice versa, a tribe getting familiar with, those county and other rural areas as well. For example, if we're not certain what is involved in a tribal cultural practice, wouldn't it be great to have one of your bridgers find out from the tribe if they could learn more about what this is and how this could benefit the child? Sometimes we just need to ask and accept that we don't know everything, but that's okay. The point is just, getting comfortable enough to ask the question. And the big takeaway is just to remember that all of these are all of our children. Next slide, please. And then just continuing on with capitalizing on social capital is, in rural areas, it's often not just the message that you have to think about, but the messenger, someone who is trusted. We often say it's not who you know, or it's not what you know, but who you know. Sorry about that. Because it's about trust in people. Who is the person delivering the message that you need foster from? Do you think people will trust the message or the messenger? What if you had a new worker from the big city come into your small community and tell you what you needed to do? How would that go over? But what could they do? Who could bring them, introduce them, vouch for them, share their capital? Does anybody have any thoughts that they'd like to share and how it applies to their communities? Does any tribes want to share any information on how we could capitalize on social capital?
Hi, this is Lori Nichols. I think that one thing we have to keep in consideration is the amount of time that it takes to build those relationships. And so I think we can't just automatically assume that we're going to walk in and start wowing everyone and get our feet in the door. I mean, I think it's a process that happens over time. And one of the things that I've been kind of interested in is to find out, we do typically in the child's welfare system, I know everybody's surprised by this, but we do have a high turnover of social workers. So I'm just wondering, again, how that affects those relationships. And I know from my experience as a recruiter, I've developed some amazing relationships so that when I go into some of these counties or some of these areas, I know people that have a high not like a title or a position that's a high standing, but people that are like really well respected. Everybody knows them. And I think to myself, what would happen if I left this position and then went on to the next position, and those relationships have to be built up again all over again. Even though I may say, hey, this is the person that's going to be taking my place, that has to be built up over time too. So anyway, I just wanted to put that in. But definitely we have to nurture those relationships.
Exactly. And I think that's kind of one of the things is, it does take time to establish, like you said, those ties and engage in that, really taking the time to listen and learn. And it's kind of that, foothold in the door of utilizing, those types of individuals who might have those strengths and pass those skills on to, other workers, or, even introducing them to, some of those community members who might have those rich relationships, the judges, the firefighters, and help connecting the two together. Anybody else real quickly before we move on to the next one?
This is Kim Fordham again, and we have contracts with the state of Idaho and as well as Eastern Washington. And one of the things, we have a recruiter peer mentor program, and what we do is find kind of what you were talking about before, find a foster parent that lives in that community. And what we're finding is, find somebody who's kind of active and excited, and then they're connected to those folks, and so oftentimes they can get us into a venue that a recruitment coordinator would not be able to get into very easily. And so we try to choose and hire people at a part-time level to just, do that work within their small community there.
Hello, this is Joanne Parank in Fort Shane, Utah. And I think that the time of the year, like right now we're coming on spring, and the youths have a celebration in the springtime. It's called the Bear Dance, and the Head Start involves their parents to dance with the children. It's really a fun time, and I know when I first started here, I had our social workers learning the Bear Dance, how to do the correct type of dance, and it's fun. It's a fun time, and it's a time people all get together. They let their barriers down. The non-Indians get to participate in the celebration of spring. So I think if we, using that as a social capital, bringing culture as a bridge to help non-Indians realize that it's a good time and it's a time to celebrate.
That is a great example, and thank you for sharing that. All right, and just moving on to the next one, Kathleen.
Okay, and that brings us to, I love that example, Joanne. What a wonderful, I want to know how to do that dance myself.
Well, you're welcome to come.
I might. You'll have to tell me when. But that's really part of what we're talking about here is cultural competence. And so we not only have to increase our awareness, but also our appreciation, and that's of rural culture and tribal cultures and all the beautiful diverse experiences and understandings that are in local communities. And just because, I live in a place called Nacogdoches, and there are a lot of different groups in Nacogdoches. So the first thing is to really get a good understanding of what rural and tribal issues and challenges and strengths. And then we really just felt like we have to add this ICWA training. That's the Indian Child Welfare Act. Sometimes we have specialists that's the ICWA person. And thinking, I don't need to know it, it's too complicated. There's one ICWA person. But out in rural America, we need to all be familiar with the Indian Child Welfare Act. We need to be familiar with the challenges that tribes are facing to bring their children home and to take care of their children in tribal families. And so all of us can become more aware and look at national, local, community data and tribal data, and also the not just the data, but the pieces of the culture, the values, the celebrations. I just love that. So become aware of like newspapers, history, websites, but also talk to the people who know. So read, visit the areas, go to meetings, participate. Becky, please add.
Yeah, and sometimes if you don't know, ask. I coming from a tribe and having, worked there and a tribal member, is we love to share information about, what our needs are, and of course, talk about what our challenges are. But, I think the important thing is to ask, and, I think more than, tribes are more than willing to share of themselves because they want to help engage and build relationships because, these are their children and they want to do the best that they can too. And there's no better way to partner than to, ask, what can we do? How can we participate? How can we start a recruitment campaign together? And, sometimes it's just taking the leap and asking the question and, be ready to listen and have fun too, because, us tribal folks like to tell stories and we like to laugh, but we also like to eat and drink, juice and pop and water and whatever, we're more than welcoming for, to share what we have, and but also learn from others too of how we can build those, relationships and partnering.
We have one suggestion from, or one idea from someone. Dana, do you want to share your comment?
Oh, sure. I was just thinking my agency was able to join before, and I'm sure the Child Family Service I'm with now is join the National ICWA. A lot of times you can join for your agency to be $100 for the year, and they just put down whoever's contact name is going to be, either yourself or your supervisor, depending on how it's set up. And they send out really good quarterly newsletters to let you know what's going up in the national level. And a lot of times you can attend sometimes their webinars and or trainings at a really discounted price. So depending on, if you're living where they have them more often, they don't get to Montana as much as some of the other states, but at the same time it's got really good information, and it helps know what national ICWA is up to, and then finding out who your ICWA person is within the agency. A lot of times they have a really good background knowledge, even if that person's new. So,
great idea.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, if we can bridge and really become more familiar and develop partnerships, that's a whole group of families to take care of our children, loving, wonderful families. So that is a huge amount of social capital that forming relationships could bring to the table. So let's see, we're in the next slide. Okay, so if you when we're talking about capitalizing on place, so we're going to go back to that. Some of the things that we want to think about when we're thinking about place is to make recruitment local. What is it in this local community? Some of you probably have experiences that you have some places where you can find plenty of foster and adoptive families, and then other places where you can't find them. And probably part of that is because where there are a lot of them, it's because it's local. It's with these people in that community. So you want to find local people with capital and to advise and to recruit. You want those local people to be your recruiters, or at least your partners in recruiting. If you don't know who the people are, go with somebody who does know the people. Show pictures of local people. I one time went to a jurisdiction and they were showing people who looked nothing like the people where they were, and children who didn't look like the children who needed to be there. So think about what is local, and use local media outlets and newspapers and flyers and radio stations. And one thing that Becky talks about is make it homey, make it real, make it something that you go, oh yeah, this is what it's really about. And some examples of this are, I know one jurisdiction was working with the Chamber of Commerce, and they helped out, and another, when the local CASA office found out that they didn't have room to do their training, they said, well, here, we have plenty of room. And so they were able to do half the trainings, the foster parent trainings, because they could take double the people in the space because CASA offered that. You already talked about school district collaborations and local law associations. I've even seen a place where we had where the law, what is it, the Lawyers Association decided to do some things on their own, and So there are all kinds of local associations. We can go to the next slide. So, so here's a question. How have you engaged place to support your efforts? And we've already talked about some of that. But let's take this one more step. After listening to other examples, is there anybody there who can think of strategies now, other strategies that they might want to try that focus on relationships or place?
We actually, Monique, do you want to share the strategy you've used?
Sure. Actually, the gal that just talked mentioned it. This is Monique Layton. I work in Idaho. I often contact the Chamber of Commerce in the various rural areas and ask them if they know of places that would be available in that community to hold information meetings, and then also about events that are coming up on their community calendar. And they often can point me in the right direction to key people in that community to contact.
That's great. And so it's not just about the meeting place, it's about who will help you with it too.
Right, right. And they often have things, on their radar of upcoming events that would be good for recruiting.
Right.
One community in our area, they actually have what's called a roundtable meeting where people can come once a month and they just come and present in front of this group of people from that community about what they would like to have made known in that community. And so that's a great way to get word out.
Yeah.
And that community also has a community WhatsApp Facebook page, and they put our information on that, and that just goes out all over their community.
Great. Can any of you think of ways that now you might want to try it out, that you want to ask the rest of the group if they think that would work? That's the second question. How could you change your strategies to focus on relationships or place? Maybe that's too hard a question in a webinar to get you to ask that. But that's something we can talk about later when, or you can call and ask us about. Looks like, yeah. I think we're a little short on time, so I'm going to skip over a couple slides. Remember, you're going to get this whole PowerPoint. But we have slides on building community, building relationships, but I want to talk just a little bit about tribal and state partnerships. So I'm going to turn this over to Becky.
All right. Thank you, Kathleen. Talking about tribal-state partnerships, as you may or may not know, many tribes have rural reservations where many of their members reside. However, tribal members do reside off the reservation. And as I mentioned earlier, tribes are very unique. They are their own sovereign nation with their own courts, their own laws, their own cultures. Some tribes have their own child welfare systems and other tribes do not. So when we think about social capital and our bridgers and bonders, there's no better way to think about tribal and state partnerships and the importance of the Indian Child Welfare Act of 1978. We could do some great work if only we support each other's practices, recognizing where we could build each other up in the efforts of finding relative resources, building pools of resource families, providing culturally relevant services, and sharing one another's resources. While we can't go into all of ICWA's specific requirements, all of our workers need to understand what ICWA requires of them. And some of that we could do by supporting ICWA practices, identifying and meeting needs of Native American children and their families together, identifying relative family resource placements for children, developing resource families, looking at keeping siblings together and reunite them when separated in care, and just building that partnership between both the states and the tribes. And one of the examples that, as a tribal director overseeing, my tribe's program, was we shared being rural, our local county, we shared a job positions to help look at building a placements for our children, having joint community events together, recruiting, talking to one another about, strengths and challenges and building that and meeting regularly. But, those are some of the things that, are a good example. And the next slide, please. I think, just talking about, the partnerships and, now that we've kind of shared a little bit about some of the bridging and bonding, the social capital, and now a little bit about partnerships, what are successful ways that states and tribes have partnered? If any of you would like to share tribes and states, that would be great.
This is Dana from Montana. I know when I've worked with tribes in other capacities, it's really helpful that you get a hold of when the tribal council is going to meet and have like a little presentation, so to speak. It doesn't necessarily have to be PowerPoint, but just something so they have an idea of what it is or what you're trying to look for, who you might need help with on the reservation, so they're aware of what your agency has to offer and also what you're bringing to them that's going to be helpful to them. And I know that was helpful with most of my tribes I work with in Montana in different capacities. I'd always check with the tribal council first to make sure I had their permission to be there and to kind of give an idea of what I was going to do, and they could help kind of direct me on who to contact as well.
Yeah, that's a great that you just engage and build those relationships.
Oh, she had to go on a visit.
And do we have any
Clones? I just
there was a Portashane tribe who is participating. Do you guys have any unique relationships with your guys' local county area? I know you guys are rural as well. Anybody else? Okay. Well, just think about that if you guys are, talking and thinking about tribal and state partnerships. We do also have a publication on our website that also talks about Native American family and strengthening and building relationships and partnerships, and we can continue moving forward. Kathleen?
I'm going to skip over. We've already talked a little bit about engaging spiritual communities, and just the only point to make on there is we're not only talking about spiritual communities that are non-tribal, but tribes have a spiritual communities and a spirituality to consider when you're engaging, and some of that cross-engagement is good. I think what we're going to do, just for the sake of time, is talk just a little bit. I'm going to turn it back to you, Becky, about the developing and supporting in rural and tribal, and then we might open it for some discussion. So.
Okay, great. I think looking at this slide here, one takeaway is being flexible about the various ways we learn, and most importantly, the values that we're wanting our resource families to learn when we're meeting our children's needs. A consideration is to be open to each other's worldview, as we shared earlier, and how we each come from different cultures and how we may be raised with certain values. We could use those rich in social capital, like our tribal elders, to share their wisdom and bridge culture and knowledge of where our children are coming from. And I think, just this bigger picture is, we have so much to share with each other, and give back to one another. I think that was, that's so great. Next slide, please. Another way to engage resource families is to ask what their needs are, so you're able to provide information and resources to them, like so many of you have shared today. Oftentimes we think resource families have enough information, but in reality, they're so busy with their day-to-day and doing just enough to meet, their child's needs and their own families. So when our families are in need, having adequate support to our staff is extremely helpful, particularly in rural communities when we have to be flexible. And most oftentimes, a lot of us are cross-trained in another's work so that we could meet our children's families and resource families' needs. Next slide. Kathleen?
So, okay, I'm not going to go through all these bullet points because you are going to get a copy of this handout. These are just some ideas we've had before. But basically, if you take the time to honor the families and the staff and the community partners, and you help families, if you really, really support your families, then they'll go out and recruit for you. And there are some jurisdictions, I've actually know of a recruiter who doesn't do any recruiting anymore. All his families recruit for him. And the next slide shows it's actually we're going to open this up now for discussion.
Okay.
So I'm going to give it back to Tracy. We tried to rush through and not just tell you things that you could actually see on this PowerPoint, and instead let you learn from each other. So Tracy.
Oh, thank you, Kathleen. Well, we just wanted to make sure we got to the development and support part because, like Kathleen said, it's so critical to recruitment. But we want to make sure there's time for you to share your experiences, and we're going to have another opportunity for you to connect with Kathleen and Becky if you have more questions for them, and you'll get the PowerPoint. So we want to hear from the group about any strategies that you've used to develop and support resource families in your rural communities. And also, if you want to share recruitment strategies as well, we're just kind of open it up to share some of your strategies, what works, if something didn't work, what you learned, what you might try, like Kathleen said, and you'd like to hear from the group about. Or if you have questions as well.
Hi, this is Pam from Vermont. And someone mentioned earlier using Facebook. And I would just love to hear from anyone that is using social media for recruitment efforts, how they're going about that, and whether they run into any difficulties with attracting, some negative commenting, and how they manage that. Someone earlier mentioned, sometimes the department of gets a negative reputation, and it seems, unfortunately, oftentimes that those are the people that are angry with the child welfare and foster parents who find these sites and start adding negative comments. And so I've been reluctant to dive into social media because of that fear, and I'm just wondering how people manage that.
Hi, this is Haley, and I'm in northeastern Washington, and I've been using Facebook a lot to recruit families lately. And what I've done is I've joined a lot of local Facebook groups. I just did a search for maybe the town name, and tons of groups came up, and so I put in a request to join those closed groups. And what I've been doing is periodically posting orientation information so that people know when orientations are in their local communities. Overall, I've had a really positive response. A lot of people either liking the post or sharing them. And I've only had a couple negative things. Some of the groups I've joined are buying and selling pages. And someone commented what are they trying to sell here, children? And I just didn't even respond to it. I just left it as that. No one actually even kind of fed into that negativity. And it didn't turn into anything else. But I think the great thing about using Facebook groups like that is many of these groups I'm in have thousands of members in them, hundreds to thousands. One of them actually has about 4,000 members on their page. And it's just a great way to network with that many people potentially. And it's free, and I can do it from my house with no problem at all. So the reach is potentially huge there. And I think
it's pretty easy if you are getting some pretty negative feedback. If you're the person that's posting it, you can always just delete that thread, and then it's gone.
Okay. Can I ask you one more quick question, which is going to expose how untech savvy I am? So how was it that you found those closed groups to begin with? I mean, how do you outreach to them if they're closed groups?
Sure. So there's a search bar in Facebook, and let's say one of the areas that I work in, one of the towns is called OMAC. And so I put in the search OMAC, and all these groups start popping up that are in the area. And then I just put in a request to join, and then the person who's the administrator on that page either approves or denies my request to join. And so actually in a lot of the groups too, especially if there was something on their group rules that said, strictly limited to buying and selling and don't put anything else on there, I sent those administrators a message saying, hey, this is what I'd like to do. Is this okay with you? And if it's not, please let me know and I'll delete it, or you can delete it and it won't, I'm fine with that. So I had administrators say, yes, please post this information on there. That's fine. And yeah, I've had no issues.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. That's great.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Other comments from folks who've used social media maybe, or just other ideas or questions?
This is Lori Nichols in Nevada, and one of the things that we use for our Facebook page is because we had some challenges like using the agency name and like representing the state on Facebook. I mean, everybody just freaks out like, oh my gosh, what if somebody posts something and we don't have control of it and la la la. Well, anyway, I was able to get around that because we call our Facebook page Child's Journey Home. And it's done through a coalition that we have with our local Carson City CASA organization. It's a foster home recruitment coalition. And so we're not posting like, we're not representing the state of Nevada. We're representing the children that are in foster care that need foster homes. And so what I do on that page is I post training announcements. We post the meetings for the CASA or the Foster Parent Coalition. And I think I have, just looking at it, I've got like a ton of people that do this. They share or they will like it. Not a lot of people comment, or it's been very positive if they do comment, just because we're not putting anything up there that's, it's going to create conflict or people are going to be upset by. So we've had great experience with it, and again, that's kind of how we got around the state, not being able to control that Facebook. So go by another name.
Great idea. Thank you.
This is Connie in Alabama. I'd like to ask that speaker a question.
Sure.
On that page from your coalition, are you doing any child-specific recruitment there, or basically notices for general recruitment events and such as that? If you're putting any child-specific stuff like a picture and a profile of a kid, like what would be on the photo listing, have you had any instances where birth family or anything have commented?
No, we actually have posted for kids that are being recruited specifically for adoption, and we have not had any contact from birth families or any of that. So maybe it's because the name of it is not, DCFS or Division of Child and Family Services. It's Child's Journey Home, so they may not be aware of it. But this is a pretty small community. Now that you bring that up, I'm surprised that we haven't.
We've talked about doing a Facebook page but putting controls on it where a comment can't show until we've approved the comment. But the way you just said you use that Facebook page is the best idea I've heard on this webinar. I like that.
Oh, great.
Because I'm with the public agency, and we've not been allowed to do it because of the reputation and the risk of negativity.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
This is Jessica Hartwig in Nevada. I wanted to add to what we were talking about with Facebook. We also had something kind of exciting happen with a Facebook post that kind of went viral. And basically it was a sibling group of hearing impaired children, and then it was picked up by a hearing impaired agency or community and sent out to many folks who are hearing impaired families that are pre-adoptive families. And we were able to get many more options of families with sincere interest, and it became quite exciting. So sometimes, that can happen when you don't expect it.
Great.
Has anybody, out of curiosity, had any type of opportunities to talk about some of your rural challenges, the strengths, and having rural training for not only staff because of distance, for them to travel to go to training so they can get familiar with their jobs, but also for resource families and getting them trained? Are there any online opportunities, or just out of curiosity, is anybody out there doing that type of work?
Haley, did you want to share your comments also?
Oh, sure. I was just commenting about putting a Facebook page and the concern about relatives seeing it and commenting. And I said that maybe it's not necessarily a bad thing, because you may be able to reach some relatives who weren't aware or of the child's situation, who could possibly be an appropriate resource for the child. That's all.
Great point.
Okay, since it's getting a little close on time, I'm going to move to the next section, but we can come back if people have other comments, or you might as we close up. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what we're going to do next, because I think there's a lot more discussion to have here, and Kathleen and Becky have had a lot of information prepared that we can't get to everything in this time, and we want you to be able to hear from each other. So we did want to offer something we're kind of calling it office hours, where you can have some consultation with Kathleen and Becky if folks are interested on March 3rd. 3 to 4:30 p.m. Eastern. In just a moment, I'll just get a sense of your interest in that and talk about how it's going to work. I also want you to have my email address. I'll email everyone who participated today, probably next week, and you'll get a copy of the recording and a copy of the PowerPoint. You can kind of go through some of the things. We don't want to read a PowerPoint to you, but there's a lot of ideas in there. So we wanted to get a sense of if you'd be interested in these office hours, just having a chance to consult with Kathleen and Becky about maybe strategies you are using in your rural or tribal community to recruit, develop, and support resource families. Strategies, ideas you have, if you want to get some ideas. So just let us know if you're interested, or if you're not interested, or if you might be, if you would, and that will help us to plan inform how we plan it, and having a sense of how many people are interested in that. Let's just give it another little bit of time. We can really get a sense. Okay, so we have a lot of people who might be. For those people who are, we'll be in touch. For those who are maybe, any thoughts on what would or wouldn't work for you for that, or even for those who are, what you'd be looking for from that, or what would make you want to participate if you're thinking maybe? Any thoughts? Okay. So
let me ask this: Are the maybes just you're not sure about your schedules and if you could fit it in, or and have some very specific questions, or it depends what you talk about, or the maybes are all quiet people.
The end of the day, a lot of information. Also, too, like Tracy just identified in the previous slide, too, if you guys have any questions or even want to share your information, please don't hesitate to reach out to her and, let her know. And then, if you guys need information, we can certainly share information as well. And you guys will have each other's contact information, so if you guys heard something, you guys could reach out to one another and also engage and participate that way as well.
Yeah, thank you, Becky. That's great. So after this meeting, there's going to be a feedback survey that will be emailed to you, and it will be really helpful for us to hear your feedback, because we're trying a lot of different approaches to these peer-to-peer meetings, and we'd like to know, what you think works well, what we could do differently. The meeting recording, contact list, and PowerPoint will be emailed to you, and I'll also send along the resources that I put in the chat. As the conversation was going, I put a link to some information about using social media for recruitment and the recruiting families for Native American children. And all of that information and more is on our website, as you see here. And we also want to encourage you to access our Diligent Recruitment Navigator, which can be helpful provide some helpful questions as you're thinking about developing or implementing or revisiting your diligent recruitment plan and program. You can sign up for e-notes for our newsletter. We'll let you know about other events like this one or webinars. We send resources and information. And you can also follow us on Twitter for some more information. And let's see. So
also,
I think, go ahead.
Tracy, do you want to share about the upcoming webinar in March?
Oh, yes. We do have an upcoming webinar in March called First Impressions, and it will be about the power of an effective response system. And we will have that registration is actually open now, and it will be on our homepage soon, and it will be included in the next issue of eNotes as well. So there'll be a way to get that information if you'd like. We had a couple little comments here, and does anyone who was writing some information in the chat want to share?
This is Lori Nichols. I wrote a comment, and I don't know if there is a conference that the states come together and discuss these ideas and learn more. I mean, it just seems like it's very difficult to really communicate, and also all that we deal with in rurals. We're having to communicate a lot through phone conferences, and you miss out on so much valuable information. I mean, we get some great information, but I just wonder, is there anything coming down the way so that there's a conference or some kind of training or something that we can do to all meet together and roundtable a lot of this stuff. Just because face-to-face contact, getting to know each other, that's relationship building too.
Yeah, that's a definitely great question, and I can understand where it's coming from. It makes a lot of sense. I think, this is the way that we're able right now to bring people together, since because of the cost involved, and it's a lot of folks have limitations on being able to spend the time and resources for travel. So we're definitely doing our best to be creative and thinking about ways to make peer connections in other sort of resource efficient ways. But we don't know sort of what the future will hold, but that's kind of where it's at right now. But thank you for raising that, and we will definitely do our best to continue to bring people together in the ways that we can.
Awesome, thank you.
All right. Anyone else have any last comments or questions? Okay, well, I would like to just thank all of you who were participated in the meeting today for joining us and for your time and for all of the great information you shared. And thank you, Kathleen and Becky, for facilitating the discussion and for the information you shared with the group as well. And I will be in touch with you next week, and I look forward to hopefully hearing from you, and we'll share some information about how to participate in the office hours for those of you who want to do that. So thank you, and have a wonderful afternoon.